What's up, everybody? In this video, we are talking about mortgage pre-qualifications versus mortgage pre-approvals. What's the difference? Check it out. What's up, everybody? My name is Daniel Ackerman. I'm a realtor with the Queens home team at Keller Williams, serving Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan, and bringing buyers, sellers, and investors in real estate great real estate information with knowledge, integrity, and professionalism. Welcome to the channel, and thanks very much for joining. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe. There's a little button down below. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, and you'll get notifications of all my new content. And if you're watching this on my team's channel, at the Queens Home Team channel, make sure to subscribe as well and hit the bell, and you'll get notifications of all our team content. And we are always posting great stuff. So make sure to subscribe either way. Thanks so much. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about mortgages and the difference between a mortgage pre-qualification and a mortgage pre-approval. So what is the difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval? The main difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval has to do with the level of verification that the bank or lender is requesting. First of all, let me start off with a caveat. Every bank tends to be a little bit different in the terminology that they use. So there used to be a more clear-cut difference between these two terms, pre-qualification and pre-approval, but these days that can be the lines can be a little bit blurred, and it really depends on the bank. So if you're a buyer working with a realtor, your realtor is probably going to ask you some questions about the nature of your pre-qualification or pre-approval to get a better understanding of what that term actually means. Traditionally, the difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval has to do with the level of verification that the bank or the lender is doing. A pre-qualification, basically you could get on the phone and talk to the lender, and the lender would ask you some questions about your income, your assets, and your debt and your credit score. And based on what you communicate verbally over the phone, or even in a letter or email or something like that, they would issue a letter of pre-qualification that is basically like a provisional letter of pre-qualification saying you're qualified for a purchase of X amount of dollars or a loan of X amount of dollars. But it hasn't been verified in any way. They haven't gotten any documentation to back that up. So it's just basically a quote, like, if this is true, then you could expect to get a loan of X amount of dollars. It's just kind of a ballpark idea. A pre-approval, on the other hand, typically would involve more documentation. So typically the lender at that point would ask to get copies of your taxes for the last couple of years, copies of your bank accounts. They would run a credit report, and based on that, they would calculate your debt to income ratio, which is a very, very important thing to know. Your credit score, which is also going to be extremely important for the bank because they want to know how credit worthy you are because they're going to be lending you money. And they're going to understand your income. So to get a sense of what you can actually sustain on a monthly basis for a housing payment. Okay, now lenders have all kinds of different ways of calculating that information, and we're not going to get too in depth on that right now. I think that's better saved for another video. Other lenders will actually run it partially through the underwriting process. So I have lender contacts that I know when they run a pre-approval, they actually run it through the underwriting process as far as they can to get a really, really strong sense of what the underwriters are going to approve in terms of a loan for that particular buyer. Now, they obviously can't go all the way because the property itself is a part of the underwriting process. So that would only happen once you're under contract and the property gets appraised and inspected and so forth. But there is a level of underwriting, or at least a portion of the underwriting process that pre-approvals can go through to really, give a very confident sense of what that person can afford. So really the bank does all of the work of deciding what your budget is going to be, because you they won't qualify you for something that you can't afford because it's not in their interest to do that. And therefore, they're ultimately going to be the ultimate say on how much house you can buy or how much apartment you can buy, what price range you can afford. So it's a very important thing to get done early on in the process. Now, how does this affect you as a buyer? Well, as a buyer, you really want to go for that pre-approval first. It's a little bit of a hassle to come up with all of your documentation, but it's going to give you a much stronger idea of what you can afford, number one. And number two, if you do walk into a home or an apartment and you decide this is the one that I want to submit an offer on, when you have an actual pre-approval versus a pre-qualification, it's going to make your offer much stronger in the eyes of the seller, and that's to your benefit. The stronger your offer is, the more likelihood there is that the seller is going to accept that offer or at least have a conversation with you and counter offer or something like that. If it's not very strong or if the financials don't look good, there's a stronger likelihood that the seller will just ignore that offer, drop it into the circular file, as it were. So your pre-approval, getting a pre-approval up front early on in the process is a much, much better step for you as a buyer than getting a pre-qualification. A couple of other important things to mention here about pre-approvals is a pre-approval does involve a hard credit check. In other words, they are going to run a credit check and it is going to show up on your credit report. It won't lower your credit score unless you do like 8 pre-approvals within a short amount of time. But it typically won't dock your credit score for just 1 or 2 pre-approvals because the credit reporting agencies understand that you're shopping for a home, you're trying to get quotes, so they're not going to dock you for that. But it does involve a hard credit check, and they also have an expiration date. Most pre-approvals are only good for about 90 days, sometimes 60, sometimes 90 days. So you want to get a pre-approval when, at the beginning of your process, but when you're actually serious about buying a home. If you're a year away from buying a home, then a pre-qualification might be the better way to go because you just want kind of a ballpark figure. Now, if you're a seller, how does a pre-approval versus a pre-qualification letter affect you? Well, just as I was mentioning for the buyer, a pre-approval is much stronger. So you as a seller, you definitely want to be looking at people who have gotten pre-approval letters versus pre-qualification letters. So when you are fielding an offer, very important to have a dialogue with your agent that your agent clarify with the buyer's agent or with the buyer directly what they actually went through to issue that letter. Because as I said, banks now are kind of using the term pre-qualification and pre-approval often interchangeably. So you want your listing agent to really have a solid understanding of what went into generating that pre-qualification or pre-approval letter. It may say pre-qualification, but if it required all of the documentation, the taxes, their bank statements, their credit check, then that's solid. That's a good pre-qualification because you understand that those numbers that are on that form are backed up by hard information. So that's going to be okay. So don't get caught up on the words so much as what actually went into generating that letter, and that's something that your listing agent should do for you. Something that I always do for my sellers is I'll call up the bank directly. Once I get that pre-qualification and pre-approval letter, I'll call up the lender directly and say what went into generating this letter, and I'll verify that they did look into the finances of the person, get the credit check, the taxes, the bank statements, and so forth. So yeah, as a seller, you definitely want to be looking into the difference between a pre-qual and a pre-qualification letter and a pre-approval letter. So that's about it, guys. I hope that clarifies the difference between pre-qualifications and pre-approvals. Once again, if you have any questions about this, make sure to write your questions below in the comments. And whether this is on my personal channel or on the Queen's Home Team channel, we will get back to you and answer those questions. Of course, you can reach out to us with the contact information below. My personal contact information is below. And once again, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, give this video a thumbs up if you found this helpful. And if you subscribe and hit the bell, you'll get notifications of all the new content on this channel. And thanks again for watching.